On a Prayer, Faith is Awaken by Elton Thomas. Episode 25, The Miracle of the Moment. The abandoned high-rise loomed over the city like a dark specter, its jagged windows and rusted steel frame barely visible against the night sky. Dusty Rhymes stood at the entrance, staring up at the towering structure. His breath fogged in the cold night air, but his heart burned with a fierce determination. Mila was inside, on the top floor. He could feel it, like a beacon pulling him forward. Behind him, the city seemed distant, the faint hum of life in St. Louis a reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just another rescue mission. This was the final confrontation, the moment where everything would either fall apart or come together. Dusty took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had been through so much. He had seen the power of prayer, of faith, and had felt that power flow through him in ways he never thought possible. But tonight, he knew he would need more than just strength. He would need every bit of faith he could muster. As Dusty pushed open the heavy steel door to the high-rise, the sound echoed through the empty halls, bouncing off the cracked walls and broken windows. The building was a shell of what it once was, a perfect hideout for someone like Jackson Brown, a man who thrived in the shadows, using fear and control to bend others to his will. The first floor was empty, the silence oppressive as Dusty moved cautiously through the debris-strewn corridors. His senses were on high alert, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. He knew Jackson's men would be waiting for him, but that didn't matter. Dusty was ready. The stairwell was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows along the walls as Dusty made his way to the second floor. He could feel the weight of the building pressing down on him, the oppressive atmosphere making it harder to breathe. But he pushed through, his mind focused on Mila. He couldn't fail her. Not now. The second floor was where the fight began. As soon as Dusty reached the landing, he was met by 3 of Jackson's men, their faces hard and cold as they moved toward him with guns raised. Dusty's heart pounded, but he didn't hesitate. His body reacted on instinct, moving faster than he could think. He ducked as the first shot rang out, the bullet whizzing past his ear. With a quick, fluid motion, Dusty disarmed the first man, grabbing his wrist and twisting the gun from his hand before delivering a sharp elbow to his chest. The man crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath. The second man charged at him, but Dusty sidestepped, sending him crashing into the wall with a powerful kick. The third man hesitated, his gun shaking in his hands as he aimed at Dusty. But before he could fire, Dusty raised his hand, the air around him shimmering with an unearthly light. The gun was ripped from the man's grasp, clattering to the ground as he stumbled back in fear. Dusty's heart raced, his chest heaving as he looked down at his hands. The power was still there, stronger than ever. But this wasn't just about strength. It was about faith. Each floor of the high-rise brought more resistance, more men who were willing to die for Jackson's cause. Dusty fought his way through them, his movements swift and precise, his powers growing with each confrontation. The air around him crackled with energy, his body moving as if guided by something greater than himself. But as he climbed higher, the weight of the task ahead began to press down on him. By the time he reached the top floor, his muscles ached, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The stairwell opened into a long, narrow hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb. At the end of the hall was a large door, and Dusty knew that behind it, Jackson was waiting. Dusty paused, his hand resting on the door handle as he took a deep breath. This was it. The moment he had been fighting for. The moment that could change everything. The room was large and empty, the walls bare, the floor covered in dust and debris. At the center of the room stood Jackson Brown, his tall, imposing figure silhouetted against the dim light. His eyes gleamed with a cold, cruel intelligence, a twisted smile playing at the corners of his lips. Mila was there too. She sat in a chair near the window, her wrists bound, her face pale and gaunt from weeks of captivity. Her wide, frightened eyes locked onto Dusty's as he entered the room, a spark of hope flickering in their depths. But Jackson stepped forward, blocking Dusty's path. "You've come all this way, Rhymes," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "But you're too late. Mila is mine, just like everyone else you've failed to save." Dusty's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "I'm not here to fail," he said quietly, his voice steady. I'm here to take her back. Jackson laughed, the sound cold and hollow. Take her back? You can't even save yourself, Dusty. You're weak. You always have been. Dusty took a step forward, but Jackson raised a hand, stopping him. Tell me, Dusty, Jackson said, his voice softening into something almost taunting. What about the people you didn't save? The ones you let die? What about them? Dusty's heart stuttered, the weight of Jackson's words hitting him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, memories flashing before his eyes, faces of victims he had failed, people he couldn't rescue, people who had slipped through his fingers. The guilt, the shame, it all came rushing back. I've been watching you, Jackson continued, circling Dusty like a predator. I've seen your failures. I've seen the moments where you were too weak, too late. Do you really think you deserve to save her? Do you really think you're strong enough? Dusty's body sagged, his strength draining away as Jackson's words echoed in his mind. His powers, the force that had carried him this far, seemed to flicker and fade. He could feel the darkness closing in, the doubt creeping into his heart. Maybe Jackson was right. Maybe he wasn't strong enough. But then, something shifted. A voice, faint but steady, whispered in the back of Dusty's mind. The weak shall be strong. Dusty's eyes snapped open, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked up at Jackson, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his spirit burning brighter than ever. You're wrong, Dusty said, his voice low but filled with quiet conviction. I may be weak, but that's where you're mistaken. Jackson's smile faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. I'm not strong because of my powers, Dusty continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I'm strong because I believe. I believe in something greater than myself. I believe in the people I'm fighting for. Jackson sneered, but Dusty pressed on, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. I've heard the saying that the strong shall be weak, and the weak shall be strong. And you know what? That's the truth. Because it's not about being strong on your own. It's about being carried by something greater. Something that has no weakness. Jackson's eyes widened, his smile disappearing as Dusty took a step forward. God doesn't have weakness, Dusty said, his voice steady. And he's the one carrying me. He's the one carrying all of us. Before Jackson could react, the room filled with a brilliant, blinding light. Dusty raised his hand, and in an instant, Jackson was gone. The light faded, and Dusty blinked, his heart pounding in his chest as he looked around the empty room. Jackson had disappeared. Mila was still there, sitting in the chair, but Jackson was gone. Across town, in the local police precinct, a group of officers stood around a jail cell, scratching their heads in confusion. Inside the cell, Jackson Brown sat on the bench, his face pale, his hands gripping the bars. How the hell did you get in here? One of the officers asked, his brow furrowed in disbelief. I didn't, Jackson stammered, his voice trembling with fear. The officers exchanged glances, then burst into laughter. Sure, Jackson, you broke into a jail cell. That's a new one. As the officers walked away, still chuckling to themselves, Jackson sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling. He had lost, and he didn't even understand how. Back in the high-rise, Dusty rushed to Mila's side, his heart racing as he knelt beside her. Her wide eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. You came for me. Dusty smiled, his hands trembling as he untied her wrists. Of course I did. As he lifted her into his arms, the weight of everything they had been through hit him all at once. But in that moment, as he carried Mila down the stairs, he knew one thing for certain. This was the miracle of the moment.